The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar, Boosting Your Research Career Through Engagement with Dr. Sara Shinton. I'm Alba, and I will be moderating the webinar today. This event is part of Communicate Your Science, a series of webinars that the press and online departments of the Society of Spanish Researchers in the UK have put together in order to highlight how important it is to communicate your research to a wide audience via the press, social media, outreach events, and to provide researchers with useful tools to engage the public with their research while developing their career as good science communicators. And now, without further delay, I would like to introduce Dr. Sara Shinton, the Head of Researcher Development at the University of Edinburgh. A former chemist, careers advisor, and consultant, Sara has focused her work of her last 20 years on supporting researchers to develop their careers and be more effective and employable. She is also the director of the Community Science Festival, Bangos the Borders, where I met her several years ago and admire her work since. Today, I have to specially thank Sara for giving this webinar because I have to tell you that she has been stranded since yesterday at the university due to the horrible weather conditions in Scotland. And still, she was very happy to talk to us today. Thanks a lot, Sara, for this. Just a small note.
You're welcome.
Just a small note. If you have any questions that arise during Sara's talk, please write them in the question sections of the GoToWebinar platform. You will see that there is a tab that says questions, and we will go through them once Sara has finished with her presentation. And now I will hand on to you, Sara, who will talk about how public engagement helps us as researchers. Thanks again.
Thank you, Alba, and welcome to all of you, and a particular thank you for your patience. As you know, this seminar has been scheduled several times. Unfortunately, my diary has just become very busy, so I'm really grateful for your patience. As Alba said, I'm very happy to answer questions. What I'll try to do is, if anything arises during that you need some clarification on, I'll try to keep an eye on the panel and expand anything. But otherwise, I've timed the presentation so we've got lots of room at the end. So Alba has introduced me very generously. I should add that the reason I'm doing this is because her admiration for me is mutual. Alba has been coming to Bangos the Borders since it began and has been a very important presence for us there. So my focus tonight is on looking at public engagement, but thinking very specifically about your research career. So I'm going to start by just running through my background, just so you understand what has influenced my feelings about this. I've been a scientist. I originally trained as a physical chemist, so I was looking at materials. I then went from there to becoming a careers advisor and suddenly got a very different view about the things about my scientific background that were important and relevant. I also became a parent, and as you'll see, this has had a huge influence on my decision to run a community science festival. The role models that children have are very powerful, and so for me, it became important that when my children were born, that they would be exposed to lots of possibilities. I left careers guidance and moved into research and development. So for 17 years, I ran a company, and that's how I may have met some of you before. I ran some workshops for SRUK on various topics, and that's where we built this connection. In this time, in 2011, I started Bangos the Borders, so I became a science festival director, and for just over a year, I've become head of research and development. And I've added in a little bracket there on my slide to say that I now recruit researchers. I've just appointed a new researcher within my team, and I'm going to be shortlisting for another post next week. So I now start to see how things present during vacancies and careers. So to begin, I'm going to talk to you about why you have to do public engagement. So this is the stick, and I don't know if that's a phrase you're familiar with in English, but we have a stick and a carrot. And the stick is what we beat you with to make you do something, and the carrot is what we entice you with and persuade you with. But within research at the moment, there are sticks. And one of them that you may have come across in your universities is research impact. And this is an agenda by which researchers do work, but then are then expected to present it in such a way that people can take the value from that work and apply it to their own work. So it's about more than just publishing papers. It's about helping people really understand your work, and also for your audiences, your users, to begin to influence the way in which you do work. So impact is a big driver. If you want an academic career, you will have to develop an impact strategy for your research. Another big driver, another reason why you should do public engagement, is that increasingly all grants in the UK will expect you to do something to broaden the value. And public engagement is a really easy way of doing that. So they will want to see, as part of the funding, that you understand this and that you will try and reach new audiences through your public engagement or through other work. And this also means that they expect to pay for this. So by doing public engagement and being good at it, you actually you put yourself in a position where you can get funding because you have a track record. And I will talk about this a little more later. This idea of the fact that by doing public engagement, you actually demonstrate yourself as being somebody who can be trusted with resources, in other words, with grants. The final area is that research is increasingly done in partnership with communities, in partnership with companies. And again, as you build those partnerships, you need to have the skills that you get from public engagement to be able to talk about your work in different ways. So just to sort of persuade you of this and broaden this, whatever, oh, sorry, I'm trying to press too many buttons at once. Whatever you do within public engagement, you need to, whatever area you have, you will need to reach people who are outside the university. Whatever career trajectory that you see yourself on, having a track record of getting funding through public engagement shows that you are to be trusted and it will boost your career. And the final point is, whatever interests you have, you're probably going to have more opportunities if you can work with people in other areas. So those are the sticks. Really, the current funding model and the current career trajectory of researchers means that you have to do public engagement. But I don't want people at my science festival who feel they have to do it. What I want are people who want to do it. And this is really, for me, why I think you should be doing public engagement. Most people who do it, everybody I think who does it, gets huge satisfaction. It's a very, very rewarding experience. You see people being lit up with enthusiasm for what you're doing, and that can help you remember why you do research. Another reason is that you are all very powerful role models. And at my science festival, I try very hard to have a very diverse set of scientists coming and presenting their work, so that the kids who come see that anybody can be a scientist. And I think that that's something we should all be proud of. Another thing is that kids and audiences outside university are incredibly curious, and they will often ask you questions which make you look at your research in a very different way. So the process of public engagement can actually be one that gives you new creativity. And people who have been successful in research, many of them have stories about how a conversation at a public engagement event made them see their research differently and led to new ideas. And I think certainly today, I'm feeling a lot of the pressures of working at a university, but doing public engagement is something completely different, and it perhaps takes you away from some of those pressures. Public engagement is one of these things that researchers want and that universities want. And this is a comic from a website called Errant Science, and this is written by a researcher who's very passionate about public engagement. And he says that these are the benefits he's seen. It's helped him improve his teaching, it's helped him get more money, and it's helped him feel happier about being a researcher. Whereas his university is happy because they recruit students through the work that he does, they build links with industry, and ultimately they secure more money. So public engagement is a thing that boosts your career, but also it boosts your credibility in your institution because you're adding value to them as well. So if we start to think about this now in career terms, public engagement is like an iceberg. You might think that all that you see is a line in your CV, but what I want to do is explain to you that doing public engagement gives you evidence of many more things. And so I call public engagement a career iceberg. You may just talk about it on your CV in one term, but there's a huge amount of other stuff going on under the surface. And actually, funding is another one of these icebergs. If you put a line in your CV saying you've done some public engagement at a festival, people can read much more into that. If you put a line on your CV saying that you've got £1,000 to do some public engagement, the fact that you've got money, people see far more into that. So there is a line that you can add to your CV, but that's just the surface. What I want to talk about is the rest of the iceberg, how by doing public engagement, you gain lots and lots of skills and development, and you're more likely to secure funding. So, whatever your path, what is it that you think your next employer is looking for? So, as you know, I used to be a careers advisor, and many years ago, I spoke to somebody who was very senior in an organisation that recruited graduates. And I said, what is it that employers want? And I was expecting a very complex answer, but instead, Carl Gilliard, who was the chief executive, this is the Association of Graduate Recruiters, he gave me a one-word answer. And he said that employers want oomph. And again, I'm not sure this translates terribly well into Spanish, but this is about energy and drive, and just somebody that when they're in the room, you feel excited to be with them. They have a fresh way of looking at the world. So oomph is not very helpful to you. I'm going to deconstruct it. And I'm going to show you what oomph means for me and what oomph means when I meet researchers who do public engagement. But you'll probably have your own ideas, and we can talk about that afterwards in the question and answer session. So these are the things that I think are evidence of this idea of oomph. Doing public engagement enables you to show some initiative, it enables you to develop and test ideas, and it enables you to have some impact. So let's start with initiative. Initiative means that you are the person who makes things happen. You start things off. And for some of you, you're in research positions where it's very difficult to have this level of independence, but you can have it in public engagement. You can decide you're going to set up a workshop, you can get the funding for that, you can plan the activity, you can completely own it. So it's one of those opportunities to show initiative. And once people hear you talking about the approach you took to this, they will see that you can show initiative in other ways. So it's like striking a match. In order to start showing initiative, there's a number of things you can start to do now. So one of them is to become aware of the different opportunities that there are. So as Alba said, I work in the Institute for Academic Development at Edinburgh, and part of my team is the public engagement team for the university. So your university will probably have a public engagement team or somebody who looks after that. And they will be telling you about the opportunities that there are around you. So connect with them to make sure that you hear about those things. Many of you will also live in big cities, and cities increasingly have science festivals, they have museums, they have attractions, and these all present you with opportunities. All of you work in places where there are lots and lots of schools, and many schools will be delighted to welcome in researchers, provided that you have the right, that you've been assessed in the right way to be approved to work with children, but they again are another opportunity. So there is no shortage of chances to do public engagement. But there's another step to this. You have to be ready for opportunities. So you have to have opportunity preparedness. And for this, you need to look around your institutions and look around your professional bodies, because in addition to SRUK, you've also got the institutes of biology, of immunology, of microbiology. All of these professional bodies will be interested in public engagement, and many of them will support you. So they may offer training. In the university, we offer a lot of training on public engagement, and we can help you get ready. We can connect you with people who've got lots of experience. And again, in doing this, not just are you doing public engagement for all those lovely reasons I talked about before, but you are developing skills, you're developing independence, you're learning how to manage a small project, you're delivering something. I've already used this word a few times, but independence is really important as a researcher, particularly as a postdoc. You have to show that you have the initiative to set up new ideas. And if you want to be an academic, it's absolutely critical. So public engagement could be the beginning of that for you. And again, as you gain confidence by delivering on something for yourself, you may have the confidence to talk to your supervisor about setting up a new line of experiments or a new set of ideas. And I think I've covered this to some extent as well. By doing public engagement, you can really show some leadership. It's something that is yours. You made it happen, you've delivered on it, it's down to you, and you can talk about it in those terms. So one of the things I said I would do is talk about the funding landscape within the UK. So I'm going to put up a slide that covers that. And this is quite a busy slide. But you can see that there's lots of different things within the funding landscape that bring in money. So I'm just going to talk you through these. So there's conferences, money to go to conferences, there are prizes. There are different awards you can get for presenting your research. So it might be a poster prize, or it might be something like the 3-minute thesis competition that some of you might have heard of. It might be that you can run a student project. If you're a PhD student, you can supervise an undergraduate, and if you are a postdoc, you can maybe supervise a PhD student, and you can get money to do that. You may be able to get money to go on research visits. I'm not going to talk you through the whole of this slide. We can maybe come back to it later. But what I've done is put public engagement right at the heart of this, because public engagement really draws all these things together. So if you can start applying for public engagement, it will strengthen your ability to go for awards in your field. You know, you're going to be better at delivering a poster, better at giving a speech. If you look at things like summer schools, those are actually often very competitive residential courses run on particular technical training. It can be quite difficult to get onto them. But if they can see that you're committed to your subject area, which you can demonstrate through public engagement, you're going to boost your ability to be successful at applying for those. You'll also see there's competitions and industrial things. The blue tabs are all about commercial and industrial fellowships and awards. And again, if you do public engagement, you will learn how to talk about your research in a different way. And that is critical if you're going to apply for money with different sorts of partners. Now, when we're talking about public engagement, you're probably thinking about science festivals, and I've been very guilty of focusing on that. But actually, a lot of public engagement is with other users, and it could include industry contacts. So again, public engagement might include things like consultancy. If you wanted to do some work with a company, you are engaging them as a member of the public, and you're doing work related to your research. And again, we can pick up on this later. So we've looked at the funding landscape. I'm happy to talk about that more. We've talked about the idea of initiative. What I want to do is talk a bit about ideas. Now, as you can see, this slide involves a man in a white coat. That, I'm afraid, makes me cross, so I'm going to turn him into a woman in a white coat before we go any further. And we're going to talk about the sense of ideas. In research, it's important that your ideas are subject to scrutiny. This happens during papers. When you write, you get papers reviewed. It happens during applying for money, when you get through a reviewer and a referee and a panel. And actually, it's really important that you learn to start talking about your ideas and shaping and forming the way that you talk about them in order to communicate them more effectively. So when we look at the ideas tab, what you do through public engagement is you really focus your idea and turn it into something that you can communicate. You focus these general thoughts into something and you work out how you're going to pull that all together. Another thing that you do with public engagement is you will match the way you are communicating, and you'll match your ideas with the audience and with the opportunity you're presented with. So if you go to give a talk at an industry day, you will present your research in a completely different way than if you come to a science festival. And that agility in the way that you talk about your research will serve you really well. And you will become much stronger at being able to judge what somebody needs to hear about your idea and present it to them. And again, this is one of the themes, boosting your career through public engagement, because public engagement will improve your ability to communicate your ideas. Another thing that you'll often have to do when you do public engagement is you'll have to convince your audience about the idea, and you'll have to convince them about you. So you begin to sell your ideas and sell your expertise. And you begin to become comfortable with that because you see that it's necessary to get people to engage. And when you become comfortable with that, you will write better grants because you will be more confident and more assertive about positioning yourself as deserving the money. Another thing that you get in public engagement, if any of you have done any of it, is you get some very strange questions. And again, you become good at being able to understand what people mean when they ask a question and answer it. And the other thing you can face are some challenging situations. Sometimes things go wrong when you're presenting your work. Sometimes children will do things that you weren't expecting them to do. And all of these things just build up your ability to cope with different ideas and different situations. So the last one of these themes I have connected with public engagement and why I think it boosts your career. We've looked at initiative and the fact that that relates to leadership. We've looked at ideas and the fact that this relates to you developing your research and being able to communicate it. But the last one is about impact and about delivering results. And again, I think we'll turn our stick man into a stick woman and we'll continue. So, impact. What this forces you to do is to think about the difference that you want to make by doing something. So within public engagement, you go in and you want either the kids or the company or the people that you're talking to feel differently about something. And that gets you to start thinking about how you turn an opportunity into some results. And it gets you to start thinking about what those results might be, what they might look like, and how they will show you that things have been different. So you start thinking about how you're going to return on the investment of your time, and you start thinking about how you might measure what is going to be different. So the ultimate aim when you do some public engagement is that you can walk away saying, I make a difference. And what I want to encourage you to do is that if you do public engagement, that you start to think about that evidence and you start to gather things that will enable you to demonstrate that you're good at it, that your work made people think about things differently, or that kids have changed their perceptions about the research that you're doing. So this is another area which prepares you for what comes later in research. It prepares you for the fact that when you ask for money, you have to account for everything. So at the moment, I'm writing a couple of grants on very different topics, but we are having to justify the money that we're asking for. So we are having to think about how we will show the funder that we've made a difference. And public engagement teaches you to think in those terms. So some other ways in which public engagement can boost your career. The first is that it can help you be, oh, my screen has stopped. There we are. It can help you be ambitious. So if you want to climb the ladder and if you want to demonstrate independence and whatever, public engagement is an area in which you have quite a lot of freedom to be ambitious. If you want to do something novel or innovative, and if you can find the money to do it, you can make it happen. Another thing is that it's a bit of evidence of who you are. So many things in research are about your supervisor, but this is something that you can make your own. And again, convince a future employer that you are going to make a difference when you come to work for them. Now, I presented a very shiny view of public engagement. Of course, it doesn't always go right. But even if it goes wrong, that can actually sometimes be a better outcome. Because when you're applying for jobs and when you're being interviewed, you often get asked about a time when you've adapted to a difficult situation or you've learned from something. And actually being able to talk about a public engagement situation that went wrong, you may well find does you more good than you imagined. The other thing is that if it goes wrong, that's also good preparation for teaching. It'll help you understand how you can pick things back up again if things don't go according to plan. So what I've tried to do in this sort of the webinar, the overview I've given you, is to show you the positives and the negatives. What I've tried to do is to get you to see there is a real value in the process of doing public engagement, that it isn't just about aligning your CV, but that the process by which you will walk away at the end of a piece of public engagement, it will change you. And you're going to see those changes in your ability to write grant proposals. You're going to see that difference in your confidence with your supervisor. You're going to see that difference in that you will feel more confident in developing your own ideas because you will have done it. You'll see a value in that you may have had to secure funding to do the public engagement, so you learn about how grant processes work. And there are many others, and I'm sure in the discussion afterwards we'll come to that. So what I'd like to do to finish is just to start thinking about those of you who are thinking about doing public engagement. How do you create a focus? So the first thing is that you must turn your intentions into an action. So if you are sitting there thinking, I really should do some public engagement, but I'm not sure how to start, talk to the people in your university who are the leads on this. Talk to each other. There's a lot of experience within this community of doing public engagement, Alba being a perfect example. So start taking little steps and start making things happen. Turn your intention into an action by looking to see what resources you'll need to do public engagement. And I've made a number of points during the webinar about how important it is to be able to show that you can map out a project and resource it and deliver on it. You can also turn your intention into action by finding an opportunity. And like I said, talk to the people in your universities who manage public engagement. They can tell you about lots and lots of different types of opportunities. It may be a visit to a school. It may be getting involved in a university event. A lot of universities have open door events where they just invite people in. It might be that you have a festival in your city, like we do at Edinburgh. We have lots of festivals that the public engagement plays a part in. Or it might be something very different. It might be a community group that you want to work with and you want to connect with. So I want to leave you with at this stage and open up the discussion to you by saying that there's lots of ways that we can move this forward, but really there are lots of opportunities out there. There are lots of ways that you can turn your intentions into actions, and to leave you with the final thought that public engagement is this incredibly rewarding thing to do. I derive huge pleasure from running a science festival and seeing not just how much the children enjoy it, but also how much the presenters enjoy it. So I'm going to pause there, let you start to ask your questions of me. I know some of you have got some questions about funding, which I'm happy to answer. But for now, to say, what is it you would like to hear from me for the rest of the webinar? Any other questions?
So does anyone have any questions? So remember that you have this tab here that says questions, where you can write your questions, and then maybe I can read them out and Sara can reply to them. So no one seems to have any question for now. So Sara, maybe if not, we can go back to the... Is there someone?
The presentation. There are some other things that I can say. I can go back to the presentation and talk a little bit more about funding and talk a little bit more about my science festival and perhaps give people a sense of the sorts of things that we do.
Yeah, that would be great. So I'll pass you again. Okay, so it's yours. Yep.
Okay. So to tell you a little bit more about, I'm going to look at two areas. So I introduced this slide earlier, the idea of things being about what researchers want and what universities want. But what I also want to do is to talk to you a bit about my science festival. So let me just get the funding slide up, if I find that. There it is. Right. So any questions, Alba? No? I'll continue. Right.
I got one. So Fidel is asking if articles in press are considered public engagement.
If it is a non-academic press, then absolutely. Mm-hmm. It definitely is considered public engagement. If it is an article in an academic journal, then it's not, because the readership of that publication is very, very focused on the academic community. But if you want to reach a different audience, there are a number of mechanisms for doing that. The first is that many universities will have their own publications, so they might be able to give you platforms there. There are sometimes student-led newspapers. That could be a first step if you wanted to start to build up your writing skills. The other thing that you can do, of course, is to blog. And if you have an interest in your research, and as long as you are careful not to give away any secrets before they are published, you can actually talk quite freely about the research that you're doing and get people to understand what it means to be a researcher. If you're talking about a press article in a newspaper or something, that's definitely public engagement. But one thing I'm going to show you, if I can share my screen with you, is an organisation called The Conversation. So I'm just going to get this up, and this is something that I would consider you all looking at. This is, can you see this, Alba, my screen?
Yes, your screen is now showing, yeah.
Yeah, great. So The Conversation is an online newspaper, but all the articles in it are written by researchers. So what they do is they have a series of themes, and if you follow my arrow here, what you can see is there are a number of headings which are about things that are in the news at the moment. So obviously the Winter Olympics has just happened, and there were a number of articles they published about that. What they also though do is they have a bank of articles that you can see up here, where the little arrow is going there, which are just about research. So if I click on the science one, for an example, what you find is that there are articles there written by people about their research, but written in very open and general terms. So we have something here about the mathematics of throwing, stuff about gravitational waves. We've got things about, oh, this is my current least favourite topic, why we are currently experiencing such severe weather and why I am stuck at the university. So if you have an area of research, this might be another good platform for you to consider. Some of the articles on this website get hundreds of thousands of hits. It's a very well publicised and a very well used resource. So I would encourage you to have a look and consider whether or not this might be something that could be a step towards public engagement for you.
Mm-hmm. And can I add a note here? So from SRUK, we have the press department that helps people to just bring their research to the press, for example. And we have the blog of SRUK, where all our members are welcome to write about the research and ideas they have. So that's also public engagement, right?
Yes, absolutely. And what there also will be is there will often be community groups who may have an interest in a topic, and they will publish their own newsletters, or charities. So if you are funded by a charity, they will probably have a news sheet or an email that goes around. So I donate to a number of charities, and they regularly send me articles about the research that I'm funding. So that might be another mechanism. Your funder could actually have a route to doing this and to broaden the access that you have to different audiences. So I think there was a question beforehand about funding for public engagement. Mm-hmm. So what I might do is talk about that briefly, go back into the slide. Put this slide up, but what you will find in terms of public engagement funding is that it is part of a very, very complex landscape. If all of you are working in universities, you will have access to a database of funding opportunities. And that database is likely to be called something like Research Professional, there's Research Connect. You will all have an institutional subscription. So one of the things that you could do after this is to find out who in your university manages research funding, and to find out from them what is the funding database that you have access to. So what you can do is search those databases, and you can use them in different ways. I had hoped to be able to show you this during the webinar, but because I am not on the university server, I cannot log in to the university's site, so forgive me for that. But you can go in and you could say, I'm looking for funding to do public engagement or impact. And the question specifically was about Africa, and then you can put in where you want that to be. So I had a look a little bit earlier, and I found one example which was for public engagement linked to astronomy in South Africa, and that was just one example of a fund that I found. But what I found was there were far more examples where there is funding provided to universities, and then they are looking to do this engagement within. So there is a big pot of funding at the moment called the Global Challenges Research Fund, and this is about doing research with developing countries. And as part of those awards, those researchers will often have to do public engagement. So it may well be that you can connect with one of these big research collaborations if it's in your area, and see whether or not you could do something along those lines connected with the research. The other thing is look to see if your university has an internationalization budget, because if they are looking to build links with a particular country or a particular group, they will often fund you to develop those sorts of relationships. But I would say that the thing to do is to be aware that the funding landscape is very, very busy, and that the best way to find opportunities is probably to look at something like Researcher Professional or Research Connect, which are databases. You will know in your university which is the one which you have access to. The other place where you may get funding from are the professional bodies. So for me, I was previously a chemist and then a physicist. So I know that both of those professional bodies offer grants to go and do public engagement. And the awards are often quite varied depending on what your ambition is, but the professional bodies will fund this as well. So there's university funding, there's grant income where you can provide the impact and public engagement strand, there's specific awards for specific projects, and there's the professional bodies as well. So I hope there's something in there to get the person who asked that question some ideas and to get them started.
Great, thank you very much.
Any questions?
Yes, so we have some more questions that have been arriving. So Angel is asking, have you done public engagement to shape the direction of your research, and what are those benefits?
Well, for me personally, my research career finished quite a long time ago. So there were very few opportunities when I was a postdoc. But what I did do, what I have done through the Science Festival, is seeing the impact of this on others. So what I have seen is, one example was somebody from Heriot-Watt University was talking to a parent at the Science Festival about they were a textiles researcher, and they were doing something with a burns treatment, and the person they were talking to worked in engineering, and he was talking about the textile in a completely different way. He was talking about it as an engineer, not as a scientist. And they exchanged contact details, and they actually had some quite interesting conversations. And what that led to was a different approach to the way that burns, when you have a burn, you have to put a compression garment on. And what it led to was this researcher found a different way of approaching the way that compression garments were classified, because when she was talking to the engineer, he saw it as an engineering problem. And so that was one example of somebody. I think another thing is that it makes you more creative, that you don't often have access to the big lab. And so there's one example from a group at Edinburgh where they devised a black box where they could show colour changes with samples by using different LEDs. And they built this piece of kit. And what that then actually led them to be able to do was it was almost like a pilot plant type effect, is that they were able to do preliminary experiments much more quickly because they built this piece of kit to show the kids. But what it enabled them to do then was to do quick experiments that weren't perfect, but gave them an indication of whether something might happen. So those are a couple of examples. I have to say, from my own research, I did once see a piece of something that related to my research, my materials that I used to research, in a science museum. And it was fascinating to see people engaging with it, because the things that they found interesting about that was not the science. They were interested in the fact that it was a material that switched from opaque to transparent, and they were interested in it from the point of view of the applications. And I think as a scientist, I was interested in the molecular orientation, and it really helped me see how to connect with that longer view. So I think that for you as a generation of researchers that are going to have to do impact, what public engagement does is it gives you a sense, it gives you helps making those stretches to think about what the end use might be. That's helpful.
Great. Thank you very much. So we have another question. Someone is asking if it's possible to have a professional career on public engagement.
It absolutely is. It's not the best paid job in the world, but you can have a career as a public engagement professional. My science festival has a budget for presenters. So what we rely on, as Alba knows, is that we rely on the universities to cover most of the costs of their workshop. If they can't cover the costs, we have a fundraising process so that we have a budget. And what we do with that budget is cover any expenses that can't be covered, but we usually expect to pay for 3 or 4 of our presenters. So we will pay them, it varies depending on what they're doing, but the most we ever paid was £1,000 for the day. So that was a lot of money, but it was for 2 presenters. They came a long way. They had a lot of equipment. So there are budgets out there if you want to start as a freelancer. The other thing that you can do, which would bring in an income stream, would be that you could train other people to do public engagement. And actually tomorrow, if the university stays open, I'm having a meeting where I'm reviewing our public engagement training program, and all of the people who present on that, we pay them. And again, we probably pay them something in the region of between £500 and £1,000 for a training session. And so you can see that would build up. The reason that I say it's not a career you will get rich in is, of course, it's quite expensive to run public engagement, and if you use lots of resources, obviously you have to pay for that. But you absolutely can make a living from it. Those are the freelance approaches. The other thing that you can do is work in public engagement within a university. So I have 2 staff in my team who look at public engagement. They spend some of their time delivering public engagement. They'll go to events and they'll talk, but they spend quite a lot of time supporting other researchers to do that. So within most, well, possibly not departments at universities, but certainly within most faculties or colleges, there will be public engagement staff. And they will be employed by the university to go to festivals, to run events, to train students. So there definitely is a career path there. And if you look at Times Higher Education job site and look at jobs.ac.uk, I suspect you will find those jobs. They will be called public engagement, they might be called outreach, and they might link to schools liaison, but those jobs are out there.
Great. So we have here another question, that is if there is any way of getting formation to be able to design and deliver a good activity for a festival, for example.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of support for you out there on this. One is that you see if your university provides training, because being able to sit in a room with somebody and have them help you work that idea out, that's a really powerful way of doing it. So start by looking to see if there, in the research and development program, there are any public engagement training workshops. The other thing that you can do is look at some of the big organisations. So again, I'm going to come out and show you some of these. So we looked at the conversation. What I might do is keep these tabs open so that I can send them to Albert afterwards. So the other one is the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. And this is a huge website which has all sorts of materials and resources on it that will help you give public engagement. It also does a lot of research into public engagement. Sorry, I'm clicking on tab. Let's get the deep engagement. Here we are. So what they will do is they will talk about, you can see here there's all sorts of resources, understanding your audiences, working with partners, planning a session, where you might find funding, how you might evaluate it. So within the planning section, there are resources here that can help you work out how you are going to do the right sort of activity. So you can see there's a project management section here. So that's one resource. The other one is the Wellcome Trust. And they do, again, a lot of public engagement, and they have produced all sorts of different resources here. So there's funding, but there's also training that they offer. So this would be another mechanism by which you can get help. But as we are here, I'm going to show you my sorts of things that I do. So this is an example of what you get in university. So I hope that between these you'll get a sense of the fact that there's online support to do this. There is funding from organisations to help you do this, and there are universities that will provide training. So the one I want to show you is our public engagement session. So there you see. Those are the courses that we run at Edinburgh to help you put together a workshop. Okay.
Good. So there was someone also on these lines asking about training, but mostly on how to write a proposal and how to get some funding and which is the best way of finding this training.
Okay. I think, again, if all of you are in universities, look to see what help the university will give you, because in addition to training, you will often be able to talk to somebody who is an expert and talk to them on a one-to-one basis. If you are interested in putting a funding proposal together, what I would suggest you do is well, if we look at Wellcome as an example, they only fund their own researchers. Let's look for another example. So if you can find a way of learning about, sorry, I'm going to find this and then, there we go, let's have a look at this. Stop talking. So I'm going to look at STEM funding, just because that's familiar to me. So what they would do, so here would be some examples of different grants and things. So I'm going to click on one. I don't know whether this is of interest to anybody, but what there will be is that, here we are, perfect. There will be a set of objectives. And what I would say you need to do is the funder, you have to imagine they're standing there with their purse in their hand. wanting to give you the money, but they will only give you the money that does the thing that they want. So you have to really understand what the funder wants. And I think that's where you begin with writing a proposal, is you think, if I had this money in my hand, who would I want to give it to? And once you begin to think like the funder, your ideas form around that. So what often you will find when you look at funding eligibility, so they'll talk about the things you can and can't fund, but what they will, here it is, they will have assessment criteria. So I think that what you would do is write out all the assessment criteria, and then for each point you would write how your public engagement activity would meet that criteria. And I think that if you start off with this approach, you will write a much better grant for public engagement. I think in terms of how to present the idea, you need to talk to people about it and possibly see if you can try it out with some colleagues, or even better, if you can find some children. If you have colleagues who have children, and you can talk to them and see what they would be interested in. So many years ago, I ran a public engagement workshop, and by pure accident, I had to take one of my children with me because she was ill. And of course, as soon as she learned she wasn't going to school, she got much better. But she came with me on the workshop. And it was great because we were talking about public engagement, and then she sat there and looked really bored all the way through. And then they talked about something, and her face lit up. And one of the researchers noticed, and they said, come and sit with us. And they had a conversation with her and said, why do you think that's so interesting? And why is this not interesting? And I think actually sometimes if you can find somebody who's got a child the age of the children that you might want to engage, or if somebody works in the sort of community that you want to engage, and just have that conversation with them and say, what sort of things do you care about and what are you interested in? That again will help you put together a public engagement activity which is about the public, it's not about you. Is that helpful?
Yes, very much. So we have another question here that is someone that finds difficult to get to adults. So she says, I find that accessing adults through talks is very difficult until and unless they are part of families, so they are taking children to science festivals. So how would you access the adult general public in talks or in face-to-face activities? And how do you come across any activity of this kind?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is it's the same as with trying to get to children. My science festival is about children, and it always was. We ran a series of adult talks one year, and we had terrible trouble getting the adults to come. So what I would say is you go to where they are anyway. Don't try and bring them into something if they don't understand it and if they're not naturally engaged. I would say it's better to go where they are anyway. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what that means. Well, it depends what type of adult you're talking about as well. So if you were talking, just about getting a cross-section of grown-ups, where do they go? One of the projects that we have at Edinburgh is something called Pint of Science. And that is researchers go into pubs and they talk about their research in the pub. So they have the agreement of the pub, and they have a little corner of the pub, and they just start talking and demonstrating and showing people things. So that is one mechanism that you can use, where you go to where people are anyway. Another mechanism is that at Edinburgh we have a lot of festivals. So we have a science festival, but again, the sort of people who go to science festivals are the sort of people who like science. If you want to try and get to a festival, an audience which is not engaged by research, look at the other festivals. So one thing that we do is run a fringe show at Edinburgh. So when the festival is on in August, we run a series of fringe shows called the Cabaret of Dangerous Ideas. And it's researchers talking about the work that they do, but it's presented as a fringe show, it's in a fringe venue, it's at the heart of the festival. And what we've done there is not try to get people to come to us, we've gone to them. There's another example of a researcher at Edinburgh who does things in the shopping centre, Ocean Terminal in Edinburgh. So he goes down to the shopping centre on a Saturday and talks to people. There are examples where people go into care homes and talk to the elderly. Or another example is a company that's based in Cardiff, and they run sort of after dinner speeches. So they go in and they entertain people who are at formal dinners, and they will give a speech and talk about science, but do it in a very entertaining way. So I think the difficulty there is about the fact that if you are not able to engage adults, it's because they're not naturally interested. You have to go to them. There is, however, another way, which is that you work in partnership with them. So you need to find organisations that represent those adults and work with them. So if we were talking about patients, there might be a patients association. If we were talking, I'm trying to think of another example, if we were talking about commuters, for example, if you wanted to do some research and you wanted to talk to commuters, you'd go to the station and talk to them, or you'd go to the commuter association. So there will be lots of, so I think in summary, it would be two approaches. One is go where they are, and the other is talk to them directly or talk to people who represent them and try and get in that way. But again, go and talk to your public engagement staff at your university, because this is something that universities work really hard at. They don't just want to talk to the usual suspect, they want to talk to new people. Okay.
Great. So also another way of engaging adults is finding things that they are interested in, for example, like the cinema. And that's something that from SRUK we also do. Marga is really involved in this, and she organizes the Cine Science, that is about this, how to engage adults in science through cinema. Yes. And
there's the film festivals, and often they would be interested in something slightly different and quirky. I'd say just look around at what adults go to and see if you can put a research slant on it.
Yeah.
So Alba, any other questions?
Yes, so I was trying to read the last one. So basically we have a last question that is, what is the difference between public engagement and outreach?
Well, that is a question we could talk about for another several hours, so I will keep it brief. To me, public engagement is everything that you do which is with somebody who is not a fellow researcher. So public engagement could be talking to politicians about trying to influence policy. It could be talking to companies about how to get some science turned into a product. It could be talking to patient groups to get them on side of things. So public engagement is actually a very, very broad term. And what I may do is add in a slide at the end of my presentation, which sort of conveys this. I left out some of my general public engagement slides. Outreach is more about, I mean, again, I use these in terms that they make sense in my head. Public engagement, the engagement implies this sort of two-way process. You go and you engage the public, but you engage them to do something, and there's this backwards and forwards. I think with outreach, it's more about taking something to an audience and going out from the university. So that's the distinction in my head. Outreach is taking an idea out to an audience, and then we present them with an idea. Public engagement is everything. It's huge. But the reality is, for most people, what they think of when they hear public engagement, they hear outreach. But outreach is a very small part of it. I think that's. But if you look at the National Centre for Public Engagement, the website that I showed you before, and I'll send the link to Alba, they have much broader definitions of public engagement. But outreach is a really comfortable place to start, because outreach tends to be well managed. It tends to be around a day or an event, so that you can do it for a period of time and then stop and rethink. Whereas public engagement is probably more about having a strategy to develop partnerships for your research. It's a much bigger thing. Okay.
Good. So this was the last question. So thank you, Sara, very much for this inspiring talk and discussion, and about the benefits of public engagement in our career, which I think they are very clear now. So thank you very much for this. So just to everyone, to let you know that we will pass all the links that Sara was going through during her presentation. And yeah, we hope you have all enjoyed it. And just to remind you that the 10th of April, we have another webinar with Oliver Escobar, and he's going to talk about how to design a public engagement process. So thank you very much for everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you, and thank you all, and particularly for your patience in research.
Thank you very much, Sara.
Okay, good night.
Bye.